Hello, in this point, I want us to check on the pharmacy store project. So in this pharmacy store, we'll be having the suppliers. We have the different kinds of drugs. We also have to track the expiry of the drugs. We have to obtain the total revenue, something like that, and the month-to-month growth. So what we actually do in this point is to bring first all those items to this point. So we have to get the data. We bring all those files to Power BI. We first have to take them to Power Query for cleaning. So let's actually hit on get data there. Then they are basically in Excel workbook. So you can actually use this Excel workbook here, get data, then you hit on Excel workbook, or you can just hit on import data from Excel. They are actually 3 files. So we'll actually use one file here, one there, and the last one there. So get data, then hit on Excel workbook there. In this point, you have to hit on the desktop. It's basically inside the desktop in my case. So I'll actually scroll down there. So I'll actually hit on this first one here, which is actually for the sales. Then I hit on open. Then it will actually try to load, and it will actually ask me, are you loading it directly into the Power BI, or you are taking it to Power Query first? In my case, I want to take to Power Query because I have to clean it. So to take it to Power Query, you have to hit on transform data. So that's basically what you have seen in the previous projects. So in this point, you can actually check that the name of the file is actually fact sales file. .xlsx is actually the extension for Excel files. And inside that file, we basically have this sheet here. So you select the sheet like that. Sometimes you actually have the sheet and the tables, which are actually the same. So you just have to decide if you are picking the sheets or the tables. In my case, you can actually check that we have one, which is actually a sheet. I've selected, and this is basically the preview. You can check that we have a null there. Yes, we also have a null here. We have a null there. So that basically means that we have to transform this data. So to transform the data, it basically means that we are going inside the Power Query. And because we are actually in Power BI, it will be the Power Query inside the Power BI. So hit on transform data there. Then it will actually open the Power Query editor inside the Power BI. Now you can actually check that this is Power Query editor. And the logo there is actually for Power BI. Remember, if it's actually the Power Query editor in Excel, then the logo there will actually be Excel, not the Power BI. This is it. And in this point, I first want us to identify if we have the blanks. After identifying the blanks, we will also check on the data types. After addressing the data types, we can as well check on the cases. Then we see if we have some values to replace. Then we finally check on the duplicates. Let's actually start with the blanks. So you hit on this filter button there. So you can actually check that we have the null. Now in this point here, you can actually check that when it comes to cleaning the data in Excel tables, the blanks will always be the last item when you hit the filter button there. That is in Excel tables. It will actually be the last item. But when it comes to the Power Query editor, you will always realize that it will be the first item. So, but when it comes to the Power Query, you will actually realize that it will be the first item. So you have to deselect the null there so that you can basically filter out the rows. And you'll actually check that the step has been recorded there, which is filtered out the rows. And that's actually inside the applied steps. So remember, the name of our query is actually fact sales. And on this point too, let's actually hit on the filter button there. You can actually check that you have a null or a blank. You click on it like that to deselect, then you hit on OK. So in that case there, we are not having that step recorded because we are still filtering out the rows. So it's still the same step that we did in column A that's actually being applied in column B. In this point here for the product ID, I'll also hit on the filter button there. You can check that we do not have a null because it could have appeared to be the first one there. Now in this point here for the quantity sold, allow me to actually have it on this end here. For the quantity sold, hit on the filter button there, deselect the null, then you actually hit on OK there. In this point here for the customer type, hit on the filter button there. Then on this point here, you have to deselect the null, then you actually hit on OK. So that's all. Now for the payment method, hit on the filter button still, then you can actually check that we do not have the null. So that's basically okay. Then finally, on the total amount, you have to hit on the filter button again. Then we do not have a null. So it could have actually appeared to be the first item there. So we are actually done with filtering out the rows where we have the blanks. Now the second item in this point is to check on the data types. So basically you can check that we have these ones as the numbers. So it's basically 1, 2, 3. Then these ones here, we have the calendar there because we are actually having the dates. And it's actually 30th of November 2025. So it's actually a full one. So that's why you are actually having there. That's date stock time. On this point here, for the product ID, we have the numbers. That's why you are actually having 1, 2, 3. And remember, for the data types, we always have the decimal, something like 1.2. It will be a decimal. For the whole numbers, in case you are actually having it to be 1 or 2, it's actually a whole number. Percentage, let's say 3%. This one is specifically for the date, and this one is actually date stock time. You can actually check that we have a clock there. Then this one is basically the time, and that's all. So let's actually address this one again for the quantity sold. So for the quantity sold, you can actually check that you have the numbers. So it's basically 1, 2, 3. For the customer type, we are having the text ABC. ABC is basically a text. I can click on it, and now you can check that ABC is a text. On this point here, for the payment method, you can actually check that we have ABC because we have the text there. And on this point here, for the total amount, we are actually having 1.2 because they are actually in decimal format. If I click on that point, you can actually check that for the decimal numbers, we have it to be point. So where we have something like 11.2, that's our decimal number. So you have to get the data type to be decimal number. So that decimal number is actually represented by 1.2. So we have our data in correct data types. I would also want us to check on the cases. So on this point, you can actually check that we have the months here: January, November, May, January, May. They are actually in proper cases, which is actually okay in our case. So let's also consider this one here. You can check that we have senior, insured, then we also have corporate. So you can actually hit on the filter button there so that you can check on all of them. We have the corporate, insured, senior, and working. Corporate is actually in a proper case, insured is in a proper case, working is actually in a proper case, but senior is not in a proper case. It's actually in a lower case, and you have to make it in a proper case. So what you have to do is to select the whole of that column like that, then get yourself into the transform tab there. Then inside the transform tab, we have basically what you call the format. You hit on the format there, the down arrow, then you have what you call capitalize each word. So this is basically the proper case. So capitalize each word. So just like that, and now you can check that we have senior in capital S. So it has been capitalized. So capitalize each word is basically the proper case. In this column too, allow me to actually hit on the filter button. You can check that we also do have the insurance in a lowercase. So we still have to select the entire row like that. That's for the payment method. After selecting it like that, get yourself to the transform tab there. Then in the formatting, you click on it like that and select capitalize each word. Just like that. And you will now have the small I in insurance to be in capital. There's something that I would actually want to tell you here. There's a difference between transform and add column. If we actually come to this point here and select it, that is select the entire column, then we come to this point for add column, then we hit on formatting, then we actually select capitalize each word, then we will actually be having a different column where the corrections will actually be made. But in this point, you will actually realize that the corrections are actually made in the same column that we actually selected. But if you would want to add a different column so that the corrections can actually be added in that column, then you have to come to this point here for the add column tab. Then you actually hit on capitalize each word, and the column will actually be added as the last one. So the last column in our case is actually the total amount column. So after total amount column, then you will actually have that column because you have basically hit on add column tab. But in my case, we are basically transforming inside the same column. After that is actually done, then our work is actually clear. Now let's actually check if we basically do have the duplicates. So for the duplicates, what you have to do is to select all the columns here. So you click on the first column there, hit shift on the keyboard, then you have to click on the last column like that. Then get yourself into the home tab. You basically have what you call reduce rows. So you hit on remove rows there, and we basically have what you call remove duplicates. So you click on remove duplicates like that, and you will check the step there to be removed duplicates. So remember, we actually came from filtering out the rows which actually contained the blanks. Then we actually came to converting some of the items there into proper case. Then we also came into removing the duplicates. And remember, we also checked on their data types, but because all these items were actually in their correct data types, we actually did nothing there. That's why the step has never been recorded yet. Now, in this point, I think everything is now okay. So what you have to do is to close and apply. So hit on close and apply there, then hit on close and apply, and it will actually be loaded here inside our Power BI. So it's actually trying to load. So it's actually the fact sales query there, and you will actually see it here. So 796 rows loaded, and there you can actually check that we have the columns. So if I hit on the down arrow there, Now you can check that we have all the columns here in correct data types. So for the total amount, it's actually having a summation. So when you actually see the summation icon there, just know that we have the numerical items there. So this is a numerical column, numerical column, numerical column, and also a numerical column. So let's also go into bringing another file. So what you have to do is to hit on the Excel workbook there. Then you have to hit on the desktop, scroll down there to where we basically have the products. So we actually have BIM products. So you hit on it like that. Then you select open. You wait as it actually loads. So in this point, it will actually ask you if the data is actually clean or not. If it's actually clean, then you have to load it directly. If it's actually dirty, then you have to transform. So first of all, you have to select. So you have to select the sheet like that. So if it's clean, you have to hit on load directly. Then it will actually appear there inside the Power BI. It will actually come to this point here if you actually load it directly. But if you actually hit on transform data, then it will actually go into the Power Query. So hit on transform data there, then it will actually take us into the Power Query in Power BI. So the Power Query editor inside the Power BI. Remember that. As usual, we'll actually start with removing the blanks. So I'll hit on the filter button there. You can actually check that you have a blank. Deselect it like that, hit on OK. Very simple. Come to this point again, hit on the filter button there, deselect the nulls there, then hit on OK. Now remember, in this point here, we actually started with removing the blanks in the first column. Then the step was actually recorded to be filtered rows. But when we actually came to this point here, you will actually realize that the same step is actually being applied. So there's no duplicate of that step. So we can't actually say filtered rows again, filtered rows. No, we are still inside the same step. So come to column number 3 again, hit on the filter button there, deselect the null, then you hit on OK. Go to the unit prices there, hit on the filter button, deselect the null, then you hit on OK. Get to this point here for the stock quantity, hit on the filter button, deselect the null, come to this point here for the stock quantity, hit on it like that, deselect the null, then you just have to hit on OK there. Then on this point here for the expiry date, you also have to do the same thing. So hit on the filter button there, then you'll actually realize that we do not have the null. So that's actually okay. So you just hit on cancel there. Then let's actually go to the next one, which is actually the supplier ID, which is actually our last column here. So hit on the filter button there, hit on the null, that is deselect the null. So we'll actually be filtering out the entire row. Hit on OK there. So the step is actually filtered rows. Just like that, it's actually done. Now I want us to also check on the data types. So you'll actually realize that these ones are the numbers. That's why you are having 1, 2, 3 there. These ones are basically the text. When you see a text and a number, it basically becomes a text. That's why you are seeing ABC there. These ones are the text. That's why you are seeing ABC. These ones are basically numbers, but they are in decimal format. That's why you are seeing 1.2. They are actually the decimal numbers. So come to this point here for the stock quantity. You can actually check that we have the numbers. That's why you are seeing 1, 2, 3. In this point here, you can actually check that you have something like a calendar because we are dealing with the dates. And for the supplier ID, they are basically the numbers. That's why you are seeing 1, 2, 3. So when it comes to the data types, there is nothing to be changed. When it comes to the cases, there is nothing to be actually changed. So you can actually check that all of them are in proper case. So we won't actually address that. So I want us to get into removing the duplicates. So I'll click on the first column there, hit shift on the keyboard, use this horizontal scroll bar by dragging it to the right like that, hit on the last column there, get yourself into the home tab, then reduce rows group, hit on remove rows, then remove the duplicates, and you'll basically check on a step there, removed duplicates. So my data is now clean. So I just have to close and apply. So inside the home tab, close and apply, hit on the down arrow there, close and apply, and now you will see it here. So we will have that query here. That is the team products. And if I actually expand it, you will actually check that we have all the columns from the category, expiry date, product ID, product name, stock quantity, supplier ID, and unit price. So allow me to actually minimize the two like that. Now I want us to get the last file. So basically what you'll do is to click on the Excel workbook there again. Then on this point here, I hit on the desktop, suppliers. So this one here, BIM suppliers, hit on it like that, then open. So it will actually ask me if the data is actually clean or you have to transform it. And transforming it, we have actually agreed that transforming means cleaning the data by taking it through the Power Query editor. So in this point, I have to select like that. So dim suppliers, then you can check that the data is actually dirty. We have null there, we have null there again. So instead of loading it directly, we have to get into the Power Query first so that we can clean the data. So transform data. Now this one opens the Power Query editor in Power BI. Very simple. Now the first thing is for us to actually remove the blanks. So I'll hit on the filter button there, and now you can actually check that we have the blank. So deselect on it like that, hit on OK, come to the second one. You can actually check that the step there is actually filtered rows. Come to the second one again, hit on the filter button, deselect the null, then hit on OK. Then you will actually check that the same step is actually active because you have not actually shifted to a different step. We are still filtering out the rows. When it comes to this point here for the city, hit on the filter button there. Then you can actually realize that we do not have a blank here. So hit on OK there. Come to this point here, hit on the filter button. You actually realize that we have a blank. Deselect the null. Then you just have to hit on OK there, and the nulls will actually disappear. Now we have actually cleared all the blanks. So all the rows have actually been filtered out. Filtering out the rows means filtering out the records which are incomplete. Now the next step in this point is to actually change the case. You can realize that this one here for the cities, we have the cities in lower cases, and not all of them actually. Chicago, Houston, Los Angeles, and Miami, all of them are basically in the lower cases. I want us to actually convert them into the proper case. So select the entire column like that, get yourself into the transform tab, then hit on the format there, then capitalize each word. So remember, we are not actually adding a different column. We are actually doing the transformation inside the same column. If you get yourself into the add column tab there, then you actually hit on formatting and capitalizing each word, then a different column will actually be added. You can check that our last column here is actually lead time days column. But if you hit on add column, when addressing this case here for the proper case, then a different column again will be added for the cities, and the corrections will actually be done there. That's the transformations will actually be done in that column which you have actually added. But in my case, we were actually inside the transform tab. That actually means that our transformations are done inside the same column that you actually selected. That's all. And now I want us to check if you have the duplicates. I will click on the first column there, hit shift on the keyboard, select the last column, then come to this point here, which is actually the home tab, reduce rows group, hit on remove rows, then I hit on remove the duplicates. Then that's all. Now the step there has actually been recorded, remove duplicates. So everything is now clean, and what I have to do is to hit on close and apply inside the home tab, then close and apply. It will actually be loaded there. It's actually in between the dim products query and the fact sales query. So we have the dim suppliers there. So those ones are actually our queries. And what actually remains in our case is data modeling. For the pharmacy store project, I want us to check on the data modeling. Remember, we have actually seen how the data can be cleaned. For the data modeling, this is basically the report view, and this is basically the table view. If you would actually want to check all these queries here, you can just hit on the table view there, and you can check one by one. So this one is basically for the dim products. It's actually loaded here. If you want to check on the one for the suppliers, you click on it like that. If you want to check on the one for the sales, you click on it like that. So this is basically what we called the data view when we were basically in Excel. So this is data view. Now for the model, you just have to hit on it like that. In Excel, for the models, we were basically calling it diagram view, but in Power BI, we are calling it the model view. So I'll actually collapse that like that. I can as well collapse this. That's all. So drag this to the right like that, drag this to the left, then drag this to the left again like that, so that the relationships can be clearly visible. So to avoid these scroll bars, you can just drag it like that, drag it again, then to avoid the scroll bars, that's it. So we basically have these three. Now, the good thing about using the Power BI is that the relationships will always be created automatically, because for the Power BI, it will actually try to check the common columns in between these tables. So you just have to hover your mouse there where we have the relationship, and you can actually check that these two tables here, which is actually the fact sales table and the dim products table, have actually been linked together based on the product ID column. just like that. So that's basically the common column between the two tables, and that's the column which has actually enabled us to have this relationship. For this point here, you just have to hover your mouse there, and you can actually check that this relationship has been created based on the supplier ID column. So the DIM products table and the DIM suppliers table have the supplier ID being the common column, and that's why we have this kind of a relationship here. So that's actually the beauty of using the Power BI when it comes to data modeling, because in Excel you basically have to do this manually. You have to drag and drop. So in Excel we always drag from a region of many to a region of one. That is, we always drag towards the primary keys. Now I want us in the next video to actually see how we can use this data model here to come up with the analytics. So I want us to actually use this data model so that you can actually obtain the different analytics, and finally we will also come up with a responsive dashboard. I want us in this point to obtain the total revenue. So to obtain the total revenue, allow me to actually hit on the table view there. So clearly you can check that we have this table here for the sales. So this is where we'll actually be obtaining the revenues. And I would actually want us to obtain the total revenue. So basically we are going to sum this column, and to sum that column, it's actually very simple. We have to use a measure. So because this column here for the total amount is a numerical column, you can always use a card. Let's say for example we click on a card, we can click on a card there, then this is it. So the moment you drag a numerical column into the card, you will basically obtain the sum automatically, and that will be our total revenue. So our total revenue is equivalent to 444.36k. So that's basically the total revenue. But remember, you can as well use a measure, and I would actually advise you to use a measure here. It would actually make your work to be so clean, because you might end up requiring to use a measure for the total revenue. In your case, you won't actually be having that measure for the total revenue because you actually have a column only. So it's very important that you actually create a measure for the total revenue. So to create that measure, you actually go into the fact sales table there, right click on it, then basically hit on the new measure. After hitting on the new measure, you have to backspace so that you can actually write total revenue, just like that, space equivalent sign a space. So we are using the sum function just like that, and we open. We are basically inside the fact sales table, and inside the fact sales table we are going to sum the total amount column. So specify that you are inside the fact sales table and you are going to sum the total amount column, just like that. Click, then close the sum function, hit enter on the keyboard. So if I actually drag that measure into a card, we will actually obtain the same thing. So let's actually see that. So I'll hit on a card there again, then this is it. I'll bring it to the top right there, then drag the total revenue into the card. Now you can check that we have the same result, 444.36k, 444.36k. So whenever you actually drag a numerical column into a card or into a visualization, then basically you obtain sum by default. So sum by default. So that's all. Now I would also want us to check on the average of sales, which is basically the average revenue. So to obtain the average sale value or the average revenue, what you have to do is to create a measure still, so that we can now use the average function. Remember, for the total revenue, we were actually using the sum function. So get yourself into the fact sales table there, because that's basically where we have the total amount. So fact sales table there, right click on it, hit on the new measure there, then backspace. Then you have to give an indication that we are obtaining the average revenue, just like that, space equivalent sign space. So we are now using the average function, average like that, then you actually open. So average of the total amount, and the total amount is actually a column inside the fact sales table. So fact sales table there, then we basically have the total amount. Click on it once, then you have to close the average function, hit enter on the keyboard. Very simple, and you will have the average revenue there. So you can hit on a card. So this is basically the total revenue, and for the average revenue we can also hit on a card there for the average revenue, and we can bring it to this point here, drag the average revenue into the card, just like that. So for the average revenue we have 558.24 US dollars. So that's it. Remember, the average in the Power BI, or average mathematically, actually means total divided by the count. So have that in your mind first. total divided by the count. That actually means that we can obtain the total for this, then we divide it by the count of this. So the count of these items is basically equivalent to the count of rows inside the fact sales table. But remember, we already have the total for this total amount column, which was actually equivalent to the total revenue. Now we are actually dividing the total revenue by the count of the rows inside this fact sales table. And how do we actually obtain the count of rows inside a table? We use the count rows function. So in this point, we can actually create another measure for the average revenue. So inside the fact sales table there, you can actually right click, then you hit on the new measure and call it the average revenue 2. So average revenue 2, just like that. You can't actually have two measures sharing the same name. So space equivalent sign a space. So in this point, we'll actually say total for the total amount column divided by the count inside the fact sales table. So to obtain the total revenue there, you just have to use a square bracket. Whenever you actually use a square bracket, you will always obtain a list of measures. In my case, I actually want the total revenue. So you just click on it like that, then a space, then a slash. That's basically for division. Then a space. So we are basically dividing that by the count of rows inside the fact sales table. So you have to use the count rows function like that. Then you open, then fact sales table. Remember, the count rows function actually allows the tables only, but not the columns. So just like that, and it's actually done. So total revenue divided by the count. So hit enter on the keyboard, and now you can check that we have a measure there, which is average revenue 2. So I can hit on a card there. I'm actually showing you how you can also obtain the revenue. So after hitting on a card there, click on a card so that you can just click on this point there. So 558.24. Remember, you can actually click on a card, then you come to this point here and click on it. And that's all. So we have 558.24. And that's basically what we actually had when we are using the average function. So I want us now to come up with an insight here. You can actually check that the total revenue is almost up $1 million. So that's it. And remember, this is basically a medium-sized store. So the pharmacy generated nearly $500,000 in sales. And this is a strong revenue base for a medium-sized store. So that's it. I want us to check on the category revenue. That's revenue broken down by categories, which is actually very simple in our case. So we'll actually do it by using a matrix. Then I'll also show you how we can use the measures so that you can obtain a revenue for every category. So allow me to actually get into the table view there and actually show you the categories. In this point here for the products, you'll actually check that we have the categories. So I can hit on the filter button there so that you can actually check on all of them. We have the antibiotics. That's the drugs for antibiotics. We have the drugs for cardio. We have the drugs for diabetes. We have the drugs for pain relief. We also have the drugs for respiratory. And finally, we have the drugs for vitamins. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So we have 6 categories. And allow me to actually use a matrix first, because a matrix is actually very simple. So I'll click inside the matrix like that. Then I'll try to expand it that way. Then inside the products table there, I'll actually drag the category into the rows. Now you can actually check that I have my categories there: antibiotics, cardio, diabetes, pain relief, respiratory, and vitamins. Then down there, we have to actually drag the total revenue into the values. So scroll there and total revenue into the values. So you can just hit on the focus mode there, and you can now check that for the antibiotics category we have 55,208. For the cardio category we have 92,693. For the diabetes category 84,748. For the pain relief category 89,293. For the respiratory category we have 57,322. And for the vitamins category we have 60,817. So remember, you can always sort by hitting on this up arrow or hitting on this down arrow. So if you hit on the up arrow there, it will actually sort in a descending order. If you hit on it again, it will actually sort in an ascending order. Now in this point, remember, you can actually get a visualization for this let's say, for example, you want to hit on a column chart. So you hit on the stacked column chart there. And this is it. Now you can actually check that you have for the antibiotics, respiratory, vitamins, diabetes. This one is pain relief. And finally, we have the one for the cardio. So we can actually say that cardio and pain relief drugs are actually generating a lot of revenue. So cardio and pain relief drugs generating a lot of revenue. Get back by hitting the matrix again. Now I would actually want to show you how we can use the measures to obtain the one for the antibiotics, respiratory, vitamins, diabetes, pain relief, and cardio. That is for all those categories there. Remember, the category is basically inside the products table. Have that in your mind. The category is a column inside the dim products table. And the total revenue is actually a measure that you actually created inside the fact sales table. So let's now go into creating a measure for obtaining the total revenue for antibiotics. So what you have to do is to come to this point here for the fact sales table, right click on it there, then hit on the new measure. Then we can actually call this one the antibiotics revenue, just like that, space, equivalent sign, a space. So we will basically use the calculate feature so that it can actually bring in the aspect of filtering, that is the aspect of where. So calculate, yes, the total revenue. And what is the total revenue? The total revenue is basically a measure. So to actually bring in the measures, you have to use a square bracket. You just key in the square bracket there and you have the total revenue here. So you click on it once like that. So calculate the total revenue where the category is equivalent to antibiotics, and category is actually a column inside the dim products table. So dim products table there, so that we actually have the category. So where the category, which is actually a column inside the dim products table, is equivalent to antibiotics, space, equivalent sign, a space. So opening double quotations because it's basically a text. So antibiotics like that, closing double quotations, then you basically have to close the calculate function. So the moment we hit enter there, we'll actually get a measure inside the fact sales table, and it's actually equivalent to antibiotics revenue. So I can hit on a card there. Then after hitting on a card, I can bring it up there, then reduce this. And the moment I actually drag this antibiotics revenue into the card, I'll actually obtain 55208.05, 55.21k, which is actually two decimal places, and that's actually okay. So remember, you can always remove the decimal place there again. You can just hit on the measure there, get yourself into the measure tools tab. Then in this point here, we have this decimal here. So what you have to do is to increase the decimal places like that. It will be 55208. Increase it again, 55208.1. Increase it again, it will be 55208.05, which is basically what you actually had there. Check what you actually had. We had 55208.05, which is equivalent to 55208.05, which is equivalent to 55.208.05k. So that's it. So I can just remove those decimal places there. So let's also go into obtaining the revenue for respiratory. So get yourself into the fact sales table there, because that's basically where we have the total revenue. So right click on it, then hit on the new measure. And remember, the category column is actually inside the dim products table. So in this point, we will say the respiratory revenue, just like that, space, equivalent sign, a space. So we are using the calculate function to bring in the aspect of filtering. So open it like that. So calculate the total revenue where the category is equivalent to respiratory. So opening square bracket there. You have the total revenue, you click on it once, not twice, once like that, then a comma. So where the category is actually equivalent to respiratory. Category is a column inside the dim products table. So dim like that, so that you have the dim products table. And dim products table, we have them here. Then we have to select on the category. You click on it once like that. So where the category, which is actually inside the dim products table, is equivalent to respiratory, space, equivalent sign, a space, opening double quotation, respiratory, like that, closing double quotation. Then you have to close the calculate function, hit enter on the keyboard. Then you will have a measure inserted here, which is actually the respiratory revenue. So hit on a card there, then it's actually here. So reduce it like that. So drag it up again, and that's all. Now drag the respiratory revenue into the card, and you will actually have 55.32k. So 55.32k. So that's all about the respiratory revenue. I would also want us to obtain for the vitamins revenue. You can check that. That's actually what we add there in the matrix. So respiratory revenue is actually 57.32k. Let's also obtain for the vitamins. So get yourself into the fact sales table there, right click, hit on the new measure, then we say vitamins revenue. So backspace there, vitamins space revenue, just like that, space equivalent sign a space, use the calculate function there, then opening bracket there, opening square bracket, then hit on the total revenue, comma, then a space where the category is actually equivalent to vitamins. Category is actually inside the dim products table, so you click on it once like that, space equivalent sign a space, then opening double quotation, then we say vitamins, like that, closing double quotations, then we close the calculate function, hit enter on the keyboard, and we'll basically have a measure there to vitamins revenue. So click on this card there, hit on Ctrl C, then hit on Ctrl V to actually paste, then you actually drag it down here. Now we will actually click on that card again and deselect the respiratory revenue and select the vitamins revenue. So vitamins revenue is actually 60.8 2k, that's approximately 60.82k. In the matrix there, we actually add 60.81766, which is approximately 60.82k. It's actually working. Let's also go to obtaining for diabetes. So for diabetes again, we actually go into the fact sales table there, right click on it, hit on the new measure, then we actually say diabetes revenue. So those ones are basically the drugs for diabetes. So diabetes revenue, like that, space equivalent sign a space, so we use the calculate function like that, opening bracket, opening square bracket, then you have to select the total revenue, comma, then a space where the category, which is actually inside the dim products table, is equivalent to diabetes. So dim products there, where we have the category, you click on it like that, space equivalent sign a space, so it must be equivalent to diabetes, like that. You close the double quotations, then you close the calculate function, hit enter on the keyboard, and that's all. Now you will actually be having the diabetes revenue there. So click on this card there, then you have to hit Ctrl C to copy, Ctrl V to paste, and we can have it up there. So click on the card again to activate it, then you deselect the vitamins revenue, and you have to select the diabetes revenue. So for diabetes, it's actually equivalent to 84.75k approximately. Diabetes 84.74822, which is approximately 84.75k. That's all. Let's also check for pain relief. So get yourself into the fact sales table there, right click on it, hit on the new measure, then you have to backspace that and indicate that we are obtaining for the pain relief revenue. Space equivalent sign a space, use the calculate function there, then opening square bracket, we are obtaining the total revenue where the category name is actually equivalent to pain relief. That category is actually inside the dim products table. So dim products table there, hit on the category there, space equivalent sign a space, opening double quotation, then we say pain relief, just like that, closing double quotations, then you close the calculate function, hit enter on the keyboard, then we have the pain relief revenue. So hit on the card there, which is actually the card for the diabetes revenue, Ctrl C to copy, then Ctrl V to actually paste. So have it down here, and that's all. Now deselect, make sure you have actually selected this one here, the one that you actually copied and pasted. So make sure you actually deselect diabetes revenue there, and you have to select the pain relief revenue, which is actually here. So it's actually 89.29k approximately. Pain relief 89.29k approximately. It's actually fine. Lastly, we also have to check on the one for cardio. So for the cardio drugs, let's also get ourselves into the fact sales table there, right click, then we hit on the new measure, then we have to backspace there so that we can actually remove that and indicate that we are obtaining for the cardio, that's cardio revenue, space equivalent sign a space, we are using the calculate function there, then open there, then opening square bracket, click on the total revenue. We are obtaining the total revenue where the category is equivalent to cardio. Category is actually a column inside the dim products table. So dim products table there, you have the category there, space equivalent sign a space, opening double quotations, then you have to indicate cardio, just like that, closing double quotations, then you have to close the calculate function, hit enter on the keyboard, and that's all. Now you have the cardio revenue there. So hit on this pain relief revenue there, hit Ctrl C on the keyboard, then Ctrl V to actually paste, drag it down here, and click on it again. That's actually the pasted one. Then deselect pain relief revenue there. Then you have to activate the cardio revenue. So 92.69k approximately, that's basically what you had there. So we can actually conclude that the cardio drugs, the pain relief drugs, and finally the diabetes drugs dominate when it comes to the sales. So they have actually given us the highest revenues. That actually means that they dominate when it comes to the sales. And the three drugs are basically typical for pharmacies who are actually serving the aging populations. So we can actually conclude that this pharmacy store mostly serves the aging population. So in this point, I want us to check on the total inventory value. Total inventory value is actually what you call the stock value, the worth of the stock. So we'll check on the worth of the stock, or the stock value, or the total inventory value. Then we also check on the low stock alert, how we can actually give an alert when the stock actually goes below a certain figure. Let's say when the stock is actually below a quantity of 50, then it should actually be below a quantity of 50, then it should actually be identified as low stock. So there should be an alert there. So in this point here, for us to actually obtain the stock value or the total inventory value, allow me to actually get into the table there. That's into the table view. And in this part, you will actually realize that we have the quantity and we also do have the price. So in this point here, for the dim products table, I'll actually click on the dim products table. We have the stock quantity and then we actually do have the unit price. That actually means that we can multiply the stock quantity times the unit price, so that you can actually obtain, let's say for example in this one here for 897, we will actually say 897 times 1132, then we'll actually obtain a value. Then on this point we'll actually say 683 times 147.15, then we'll actually obtain a value. 583 times 75.37, then we actually obtain a value. Then we'll now sum up all these values here so that we can obtain the stock value. So remember in this point here, the product name is actually Med 1001. The unit price is actually 11.32 and the stock quantity is actually 897. So the total stock value for Med 1001 will actually be equivalent to 897 times 11.32. When it comes to Med 1011, it will actually be 147.15 times 683, and that one will actually be the stock value for Med 1011. How about all these products that you actually do have, or all these drugs that you actually do have? So you actually realize that we have to either create a column there where we'll actually be multiplying this value here, that's actually the stock quantity and the unit price. Then we finally sum up all those values there, or we just use the sum x. So remember, sum x is actually different from the sum function. When you actually say sum, then it actually obtains for you the sum in a given column only. But when you actually say sum x, then it will multiply this 897 times 1132, then come to this point again, multiply 683 by 147.15, then for the results, it will finally add. So it's either we add a column. So in this point, allow me to actually show you how we can add a column. So inside this table tools tab, you have to click on it like that. Then we basically have the calculations group and what you call the new column. Click on the new column there. Then it will actually add a column. We have to rename it and call it the stock value or inventory value, just like that. Space equivalent sign a space. So it will be equivalent to the stock quantity here times the unit price here. That is the total stock value for the product name equivalent to Med 1001. So for Med 1001, the stock value will actually be equivalent to the stock quantity 897 times the unit price. For Med 1011, the stock value will actually be equivalent to the stock quantity 683 times the unit price 147.15. So I want us to obtain all those values in this column here. So remember, all these items are basically inside the dim products table. So to obtain the stock quantity and the unit price column, we have to type dim products there, dim like that, so that you have the stock quantity. So that's basically the stock quantity. So the stock quantity times the unit price. The unit price is still in the same table. So unit price there, and that's all. So stock quantity times the unit price, then I will basically have the item there, which is actually the stock value for med 1001 and all these other remaining products down there. So hit enter on the keyboard, and now you can check that I have the stock values for all these products down there. So this 10154.04 is basically the stock value for med 1001. This 10503.45 is basically the stock value for med 1011. This 43940.71 is basically the stock value for med 1016. How about the total stock value? Because these ones are basically for the individual products. How about the total stock value that you actually do have in the pharmacy? Because the stock value is actually equivalent to the inventory value. So what you have to do is to obtain the sum for all this. So let's actually get back into the report. So in that point there, up there inside the dim products table, you actually realize that we now have a column. So this is basically for a column. So we have a column called stock value. And remember, when it actually comes to the numerical columns, you just have to drag them into the card. There's no need for you to actually create a measure. So long as the column is actually numerical, if you drag it into the card, you will obtain the sum automatically. That's by default. So let's actually see that. So I'll click on a card there. Then I just tick on stock value. Now you can actually check that the stock value or the inventory value is 16.19 million. I can as well create a measure so that you can actually see if you'll obtain the same thing. So inside the dim products table there, I'll actually get there and right click. Then I hit on new measure, and then I'll actually call this one the inventory value, just like that, space equivalent sign space. So we are basically obtaining the sum, and this sum is actually inside the stock value column, and that stock value column is actually inside the dim products table. So dim products table, remember the table actually comes first. So the dim products table, scroll down there to where we basically have the stock value. This is it. So inside the dim products table, we have the stock value column. So click on it once like that, then you have to close the sum function. So the moment you actually hit enter, you will actually have a measure there inside the dim products table. So I'll actually click on a card there. Then that's inside the visualizations. Then the card is actually selected. You can actually check it's actually selected. Then I come to this point here and activate the inventory value. So I should actually get 16.19 M. So select the inventory value there. So we have 16.19 M. So it's actually the same. Now, instead of us actually creating that column for the stock value, we can basically use the sum X function. So I'll actually hit on the table view there. So instead of us actually creating this column here, we can basically use the sum X function, because inside the sum X function, we'll actually say obtain the stock value for med 1001, which is basically the stock quantity of 897 times 11.32. Then also obtain the stock value for med 1011, which is basically 683 times 147.15. Then obtain the stock value for med 1016, which is basically 583 times 75.37. It will actually obtain all that and sum automatically without you having to create a different column. So it will actually run the calculations row by row. That's why we call it sum X, row by row. So let's basically check how that can actually work. So in this point here, we are actually going to create a new measure inside the dim products table there, and we are calling it the total inventory value. So remove that measure there, backspace, then total inventory value, just like that. A space equivalent sign, a space. So we are using the sum X so that we actually avoid the work of creating a new column. So the sum X will actually go row by row, then obtain for you the sum automatically. So open it like that. It will ask you what's the table. The table in my case is actually the dim products table. So dim products table there, I'll actually click on it like that. Then the next item is actually the expiration. So a comma, then expiration. So the expiration in my case is actually the stock quantity times the unit price. We have them here, the stock quantity column times the unit price column, all inside the dim products table. So to obtain the stock quantity, you have to type the dim like that first, stock quantity there, a space, asterisk. So shift 8 asterisk, that's actually multiplication, then a space. So we are multiplying the stock quantity by the unit price. So remember, the unit price is also a column inside the dim products table like that. So the stock quantity times the unit price in each of the rows, then finally it will obtain the sum. So you can actually check that it's different from the sum. The normal sum will actually obtain for you the total amount in one column, but this sum X will actually go row by row. So you have to identify the rows here. We have actually said that it's the stock quantity times the unit price. So it will now go row by row. It now multiplies the quantity and the unit price in product A, quantity and unit price in product B, quantity and unit price in product C, quantity and unit price in product D, like that, all the way up to the last one. Then it will sum all those results. So that's basically the sum x. So you have to close the sum x function there and hit enter on the keyboard. Then we'll basically have the total inventory value there. So allow me to have this one up there. So I can also insert a different one, and we can drag it there again. So click on it like that, then activate total inventory value, select it. So we have method 1, method 2, and finally we have method 3. All of them actually giving us the same value, which is 16.19 M. So that's all about the total inventory value. Now I want us to see how we can obtain the number of items which are actually running on low stock. So to obtain the number of items running on a low stock, let's say for example, the stock quantity is basically this one here, this column here. So if the items are now less than 100, like in this point here, this is 57. So this one is basically less than 100. So we should actually mark this. So we are identifying that this one here, which is made 1040, is now low on stock. Then scroll down there so that you can also check if we have another item. So in this part, we also have 64, which is basically made 1208. So we have 64 there. Scroll down again. And now you can actually check that we also do have 74, which is basically made 1275. So I want us to count the total number of rows where the stock quantity is basically less than 100, so that you can identify the number of products which are actually on a low stock. So to identify the number of products which are on a low stock, it actually means that we have to count the stock quantities here which are basically less than 100. For example, we have said 74. We have also said 96. We will also say 55 there. So it's not actually a must that it should be 100. It can be 200 in your case. It can also be 300. But in my case, I would actually want us to use 100. So it's actually very simple. So we have to create a measure inside the dim products table, because that's basically where we have our stock quantity. So get yourself into the dim products table there. Then you have to right click, hit on the new measure. Then we actually say the low stock alert, just like that, space equivalent sign a space. So we now have to count the number of rows inside the stock quantity column where the stock quantity is basically less than 100. So we have to use the calculate function so that it can give us the aspect of filtering. So calculate function, yes. Then we now have to count the number of rows inside the stock quantity column where the stock is basically less than 100. So we are basically counting the number of rows in the dim products table. Remember, count rows function actually runs in a whole table. It doesn't actually run on a column. So it has to run on a table like that. Then you actually have to close. Then you have to specify. That is, we are counting the number of rows in the dim products table where that aspect of where is actually brought in by the use of calculate function. So we are counting the number of rows in the dim products table where the column is equivalent to the stock quantity. So where the column, and that column stock quantity is also inside the dim products table. Dim products there, then you have to select the stock quantity. So where the stock quantity, which is also inside the dim products table, is less than 100. So space, then less than, like that, 100. Then you have to close the calculate function. So we are obtaining or calculating the total number of rows inside the dim products table where the stock quantity, and for you to actually obtain the stock quantity, you must first type the dim products where the stock quantity is less than 100. So the moment I actually hit enter there, you will actually obtain a measure there for the low stock alert. Hit on a card there, so drag it to the right, then you can just click on it like that. That is, you select, then you just have to click on the low stock alert there. So the number of products which are actually on a low stock is equivalent to 21. That's all. So we have actually identified the total inventory value, and we also know the total number of items which are actually running on a low stock. On a low stock means that the quantity is now less than 100. So that's all. Now, given that we actually do have the total revenue and we also do have the total inventory value, then it's also very possible for us to actually obtain the rate of stock turnover. So to obtain the stock turnover, we always say the total revenue divided by the total inventory value. So we basically have the total revenue down there. So total revenue is actually here. And we basically do have the total inventory value, which is the stock value, inventory value, which is actually here. So we can basically obtain the rate of stock turnover or the stock turnover. So we can actually get into the dim products table there, then right click, then hit on a new measure. Then we'll actually call this one stock turnover, just like that. Then space equivalent sign a space. So stock turnover is basically equivalent to the total revenue, which is actually here. You click on it once, yes. So total revenue divided by total inventory value. So a space, division sign there, a space divided by total inventory value. Opening square bracket, look for total inventory value. It's actually here. You click on it like that. So hit enter on the keyboard and we'll actually get the stock turnover there. So hit on a card there again, then drag it down there and make sure it's actually selected. Now you can actually check on the stock turnover. So the stock turnover is basically equivalent to 0.03. So click on the stock turnover there. So the measure tools tab will actually be activated by default. Now come to this point here for the formatting. Then you hit on the percentage. So it's basically equivalent to 2.74%. That's actually the rate of stock turnover or the stock turnover. So we can now make a conclusion here based on the inventory value and the low stock alert. So you can actually check that the inventory value is actually too high. 16.19 million is not a joke actually. That's actually a lot of money. So significant capital is actually tied up in stock. So poor management here risk expiry losses or cash flow issues. And for this part here on the low stock, we can actually say that 21 items are on low stock and need to be reordered. Just like that. And that's all. So let's actually check on the next item. In this part, I want us to check on the sales by customer type. Now, if we actually go into the table view there, you'll actually realize that inside the fact sales table, we basically have a column called the customer type. And allow me to hit on the filter button there so that you can check on all the customer types that we basically have in this pharmacy store. So we have the corporate type of customers, the insured type of customers, the senior type of customers, and the working type of customers. 4 different types of customers. Now I would want us to break down the revenue based on the corporate type, revenue based on the insured type, revenue based on the senior type, and finally revenue based on the working type. So it's actually very possible. So get yourself into the report view there. Then inside the fact sales table, you have to hover your mouse there so that you can actually right click or just hit on these 3 dots there. Then we hit on new measure. So we'll actually say revenue by corporate customer type, corporate city, just like that. Space equivalent sign a space. So revenue by corporate customer type. So it will be equivalent to, so basically in this part, we are going to use the calculate function because we want the revenue, yes, where the customer type is equivalent to corporate. So that aspect of where is actually brought in by the calculate function. So calculate like that, then you actually open a square bracket. So we are obtaining the total revenue. Remember, we already have the total revenue, so it's actually a measure that we have. So just have a square bracket, then it will actually appear. Then you just have to click on it once, then comma space. So calculate the total revenue where the customer type is equivalent to corporate. Customer type is actually a column. It's actually here. It's actually a column inside the fact sales table. So fact sales table there, we have the customer type. So where the customer type is equivalent to corporate. So space equivalent sign a space, opening double quotation, corporate. Just like that, closing double quotation, close the calculate function, hit enter on the keyboard, and now we will be having the revenue by corporate customer type. Remember, we actually inserted the measure in the fact sales table. So the measure must also be in the fact sales table. It's actually here, revenue by corporate customer type, revenue by corporate city. So click on a card like that, then you can actually check that it's selected. So you just have to tick on the revenue by corporate city, just like that. Now let's also obtain the breakdown of revenue by another customer type. So for the other customer type, you have to come to this point here, hit on the filter button. Then after corporate, we have insured. So get back into the report view there. Then inside the fact sales table, because that's basically where we have the revenue. Yes, we have the revenue here, down here, total revenue. So inside the fact sales table, we have to create a new measure. So right click on it like that, hit new measure, then you'll actually say revenue by insured CT. So revenue by insured CT, which is insured customer type, space equivalent sign a space. So we'll now use the calculate function like that. Then we open, so opening square bracket so that we can identify the total revenue. So scroll down there, total revenue is actually here. So we are actually obtaining the total revenue where that aspect of where is actually brought in by the calculate function. So where the customer type is equivalent to insured. So comma space. So where the customer type is equivalent to insured. The customer type is actually inside the fact sales table. So fact sales table there, we have the customer type. So where the customer type is equivalent to insured. So space equivalent sign a space, opening double quotation, insured. Just like that, closing double quotation, close the calculate function, hit enter on the keyboard. And we now have the measure there, which is actually revenue by insured CT. So I can also hit on a card there, then have it on this part there, select it, then you just have to tick on it like that, and the revenue by insured CT or revenue by insured customer type is 123.87k. That's it. Now I want us to check on the other customer type again. So hit on the table view there, filter button. After insured, we basically have senior, then work in. So get into the report view there again, then in the fact sales table there, right click, then hit on a new measure. So we will actually say revenue by senior customer type CT, just like that, space equivalent sign a space. So calculate like that the total revenue, and the total revenue is actually a measure that you already do have. So opening square bracket, then scroll down there to where we basically have the total revenue. You click on it once, not twice, once, then a comma, then a space. So obtain the total revenue where the customer type is equivalent to senior. The customer type is actually inside the fact sales table. So fact sales table like that, then identify the customer type, click on it like that, space equivalent sign a space where the customer type is equivalent to senior. So senior like that, closing double quotation, then you close the calculate function, hit enter on the keyboard. That's all. We can actually have the one again for the work in, so that we can actually bring the two cards here. So let's also have another measure there, the last one, which is actually for the work in. So have your mouse there, then you just have to right click, then you hit on new measure, just like that. Then you have to backspace and say revenue by work in CT, work in customer type, space equivalent sign a space. So we use the calculate function again, opening square bracket, then down there we have to click on the total revenue once like that, comma, a space. So we are obtaining or calculating the total revenue where the customer type is equivalent to work in. That customer type is actually inside the fact sales table. It's a column inside the fact sales table. So fact sales table like that, then you have the customer type, click on it once, space equivalent sign a space, opening double quotation, work, then even in, just like that, closing double quotation, you close the calculate function, hit enter on the keyboard. So we basically have two measures there. So I can hit on a card, then I bring it to this part here, then I also hit like that, then I bring it to this part here. I can bring it to the far right like that. Now in this point, allow me to click on the first one there, then down here we have to select revenue by senior customer type. So you come to this point here and you just have to click on it. So revenue by senior customer type is equivalent to 107.83k. Come to this part again for this card, you click on that card like that, then come down here, revenue by working customer type. Click on it like that, and the revenue is actually equivalent to 102.68k. So you can clearly check that most of the revenue is actually generated from the insured customer types. Then this will actually help you when it comes to marketing and stock decisions, because if you would actually want to market your pharmacy store, then it will actually be very important that you reach these people here. And if you'd actually want to make good stock decisions, then you'd actually have to stock your pharmacy based on the items that majority of the insured customer types actually consume. So for the stock, you actually go with the group that actually gets you the highest revenue. And when it comes to marketing, we have to improve on this point here, which is actually the customer type is actually the walk-in. So that's all about the revenue by customer types. In this point here, for the expiry risk analysis, I would actually want us to identify the total quantity which is about to go expired. That is, we can actually say the total quantity that actually goes expired in less than or equivalent to 30 days. That is in the next month. So at that point, I would want us to obtain the total sum of that quantity. So you can realize that in the dim products table, we basically have the expiry date there. So what you have to do is to insert a new measure there. So insert a new measure, right click, then you hit on a new measure, then we say expiring in 30 days time. Just like that, expiring in 30 days time, space equivalent sign a space. So in this point, we are basically going to obtain the total quantity, that is the sum of quantity that is actually going to expire in less than or equivalent to 30 days, that is going to expire in less than or equivalent to 30 days. We basically have the expiry date there. So that actually means that we have to use the calculate function so that you can filter the expiry dates and obtain for the ones which are actually going expired in the next 30 days. So we are going to use the calculate function like that. Then we actually open. So we are calculating the total quantity, and to obtain the total stock quantity, we have to use the sum function. So we are using the sum function because we are obtaining the total stock quantity, and this stock quantity is basically a column inside the dim products table. So dim products table, then you identify the stock quantity, it's actually there. So we are obtaining the sum of the stock quantity just like that. Then you basically close the sum. Yes, where the expiry date is within the 30 days. So we have to set the filter for the expiry date. So in this point, we also have to use the date difference function so that it can actually get us the number of days remaining for the product to actually expire. So if today is actually 26th of June, and the product is actually set to expire on 29th of June the same year, then it actually means that 29 minus 26 is actually 3. So it's basically less than 30. So we are actually going to include in expiry in 30 days time. So we have to use the date diff so that you can basically obtain the number of days that's actually remaining for the products to be expired. So if the product is actually expiring within the 30 days, then we will actually include when running for the sum. So open it like that. So date one is actually today. So today function is just like that. There's nothing inside it like that. The second date is basically the expiry date, and the expiry date is actually a column inside the dim products table. So we have to type dim like that so that you can basically obtain the expiry date. So you have to click on it. In this point, we are basically subtracting the days. So expiring in 30 days, we would like to obtain the number of days there. So I just have to close it like that. Then we say is less than or equivalent to 30. So in this point, we'll say expiry date minus today's date. So if we obtain something like 33, then it actually means that it is not expiring in 30 days time. So we will not actually include the total stock quantity of that product in the summation. So if the subtraction in this point is actually 30 plus, let's say 38, then it actually means that we are not going to include the summation of the stock quantity in this calculation. But if it's something like 25, that is expiry date minus today's date is actually getting you something like 25 days, then it actually means that that product is actually going to expire in 30 days time. And because it's actually going to expire in 30 days time, then it actually means that we are supposed to include that stock quantity in the summation so that we can actually identify the total stock quantity which is going to expire in 30 days time. So close the calculate function like that, then hit enter on the keyboard, and that's all. Now you can actually check that we have expiring in 30 days time. So I can actually hit on a card there, then the card is actually active, then I just have to tick in expiring in 30 days time. So clearly you can check that the total stock quantity which is actually expiring in 30 days time is 4,242. So it's actually a very huge value there. I would also want us to obtain the value of this stock here. I want us to obtain the inventory value. So the value of the stock. It's actually very possible. So what we are going to do is to introduce a measure, because this is basically not having the value. So we have to get ourselves into the dim products there so that we can introduce a measure and say expiry risk value. So expiry risk value. This is the total value of the inventory, which is actually due to expiry. So it's equivalent to then a space. So we will actually use the calculate function so that it can actually bring us the feature of filtering. So calculate the total inventory value. We basically have the total inventory value. So the total inventory value is somewhere here. So we are basically obtaining the total inventory value where. That's why we have actually used this calculate so that it can actually bring us the aspect of where the expiry date is basically within 30 days. So to obtain the days, we basically have to use the date diff function. So date diff like that, where date one is actually today. So today like that, there's nothing inside it like that. Then comma date 2 is basically the expiry date, and the expiry date is actually inside the dim products table. Yes, it's actually a column inside the dim products table. So you have to type dim like that so that you can actually obtain the expiry date as a column there. So if you subtract this expiry minus 2 days, we actually want to obtain the day. So if that day is actually less than 30, so close the date diff function is less than or equivalent to that, just like that. So in this point here, we are actually filtering out so that we can actually obtain the total inventory value for the items which are actually going to expire in 30 days time. So after that, like that, you have to close the calculate function, then hit enter on the keyboard. Then we will have the expiry risk value there. So I can hit on a card there, then drag the expiry risk value, or I can just select on it like that because the card is actually active. So the expiry risk value is basically equivalent to 247.54k. It's actually a lot of money. So actually the worth of the stock which is going to expire in 30 days time, and this is basically the total quantity or the sum of quantity of stock which is actually going to expire in 30 days time. 42. So expiry is actually a silent profit killer when it comes to the pharmacy stores, and what we can actually advise in this small pharmacy store is that we should actually give proactive discounts for these products so that you can actually avoid going at a loss. Because if we actually give them at a discount, then it actually means that majority of the customers will actually be coming to our store. Otherwise, this one can actually be a very huge loss. So we have to avoid this. In this part, I want us to check on the supplier performance. So remember that in the table view there, that's inside the dim suppliers table, we actually have the names of the suppliers. So I can hit on the filter button there, and you can actually check that we have many of them. Yes. So I want us to actually check on the supplier who actually gave us the highest revenue, because the supplier who actually gave us the highest revenue actually means that they were supplying in high volume and also they are reliable. So we are going to break down the total revenue by the supplier's name so that we can identify the supplier who is actually reliable. That's the first point. Yes. And the second point is that this supplier is actually supplying in high volume. For you to actually generate the high revenue, then it actually means that you have been supplying the stock in high quantities. That's it. So what you'll actually do in this point is to hit on a matrix like that. Then after clicking on a matrix, you can actually check that you have the supplier name inside the dim suppliers table. I can actually select the supplier's name there, and you can actually check that these ones are actually the suppliers that you basically have. Scroll down there to where we have the total revenue. Click on it again. And this is basically what you have. So I'll actually hit on the focus mode there. Now you can actually check that you have supplier 1, supplier 10, supplier 11, and these ones are actually the total revenue by these suppliers. Now I would actually want to have the supplier with the highest revenue on top. So I'll have to hit on the down arrow there inside the total revenue. So hit on it like that. And now you can actually check that supplier 77 actually gave us the highest revenue of 15,716.29. So this basically means that this supplier is actually reliable, and this supplier also gets us the products in high volume. Supplier 79 is not also bad because we have the total revenue to be 12,435.39. Supplier 27 is also doing fair. Total revenue is actually 12,129.83. So these ones are basically the top 3 suppliers when it comes to reliability and supply of high volume products. That's all. And the worst supplier that you basically have in this point here is supplier 1, because the total revenue is actually 89.32. So not reliable and also supplying in less quantities. Top 3 suppliers is supplier 77, supplier 79, and supplier 27. So that's how you can actually do the supplier performance analysis. So we have basically broken down the total revenue by the suppliers' names. Assuming that we have been given the profit margin to be equivalent to 35%, so that's basically equivalent to 0.35. So we can now calculate the gross profit. We can as well obtain the cost of goods sold. Gross profit is basically equivalent to the total revenue times the profit margin, which is basically equivalent to 0.35 because that 5% is 0.35. So let's actually go into obtaining the gross profit. So I'll actually right click inside the fact sales table there because that's where we have the total revenue. Right click so that we can insert a new measure. So when it comes to obtaining the gross profit space equivalent sign a space, it will be equivalent to the total revenue times the profit margin, which is equivalent to 0.35. So that profit margin is what we have actually simulated. Yes, we never actually calculated. We are just assuming that given the profit margin to be that 5%, can we actually obtain the gross profit? Yes, we can obtain the gross profit. We can also obtain the cost of goods sold. Remember, the total revenue is actually inside a measure that we created. So to actually obtain all the measures, you use a square bracket there. Hit a square bracket, and you now have to scroll down there and hit on total revenue, just like that. So gross profit is equivalent to total revenue times the profit margin, which is basically equivalent to 0.35. So space, then shift 8 for the asterisk, then another space there, 0.35, just like that. So total revenue times the profit margin will actually get you the gross profit. So the moment I hit enter there, we'll actually have a new measure there, which is basically the gross profit. So I can hit on a card there, then drag the gross profit into the same card, just like that. And you can actually check that the profit will be 155.53K. Now, given that we also have the gross profit, then we can also calculate the cost of goods sold. So remember, we have the total revenue and we have the gross profit. So it's actually very simple to obtain the cost of goods sold. So the cost of goods sold will basically be equivalent to the total revenue minus the gross profit. So we can actually insert a new measure there again when it comes to the fact sales table, because that's where we have the total revenue and the gross profit margins. So right click there, hit on a new measure, then we actually say cost of goods sold, COGS, space equivalent sign a space. So in this part, we'll actually say total revenue minus the gross profit. So to obtain the measure for the total revenue, hit a square bracket there. That's the opening square bracket. Scroll down there. Total revenue is actually here, just like that. Space minus a space. So total revenue minus the gross profit. So remember, the gross profit is also a measure that you actually created. It's actually here. The gross profit is actually equivalent to 155.53K. So where do we actually obtain this one? Inside the gross profit measure. So opening square bracket there, scroll down there to where we basically have the gross profit measure. Click on it once like that. So the cost of goods sold will basically be equivalent to the total revenue minus the gross profit. Just like that, hit enter on the keyboard and we'll basically have a new measure there, COGS. Click on a card there, then I can actually bring it to the center like that. Then make sure it's actually selected. Then you just have to tick on cost of goods sold. So it's basically 288.83K. Given that we also have the gross profit and we also do have the total revenue, then you can basically obtain the net profit margin. The net profit margin is basically equivalent to the gross profit divided by the total revenue. So let's also go into the fact sales table, because that's where we have the gross profit measure and the total revenue measure. So right click there, then hit on a new measure, then backspace so that you can have the net profit margin, just like that, space equivalent sign and space. So in this point, we are actually going to use the divide function because it's GP, which is actually the gross profit divided by the total revenue, TR. So divide like that, then open. So in this point, we are actually dividing the gross profit. So gross profit is actually a measure. So open square bracket there, then hit on gross profit there. So gross profit then divided by, that's a comma, then divided by, the denominator is basically the total revenue. And remember, the total revenue is also a measure that we actually created. So hit on a square bracket there, scroll down there to where we basically do have the total revenue. click on it like that. And the alternate result, comma, the alternate result can be a 0, just like that, and you close the divide function. So the moment you actually hit enter there on the keyboard, you will actually add the net profit margin here. So let me also hit on a card, then drag this card, click on the net profit margin like that. So the net profit margin is actually equivalent to 0.35. Now remember, this 0.35 is actually what we had simulated so that you can obtain the gross profit. So this 0.35 as a net profit margin is not actually that bad. But if you actually try to control the cost and most importantly controlling the expiry of the products, then it actually means that this profit margin can actually be pushed upwards, because controlling the cost actually means that the profit will go higher, because cost is what actually eats the profit, and the same thing actually applies to the expired products. So if the products actually expire, then it actually means that it will be eating on the profit. So to actually push the net profit margin higher, you have to control on the cost. Then you also have to be very keen when it comes to the expiry of the products. At this point, I want us to check on the sales velocity. So for the units sold per day, remember that we actually have a lot of units here sold. You can check that you have the quantity sold. It's actually here. It's actually a column which is inside the fact sales table. So we can actually see that there are so many. So what you are actually going to do is to obtain the sum of this quantity sold. Then we actually divide the sum of this quantity sold by the count of sale dates. But there's something interesting here. Because you would actually want to identify the units sold per day, then we won't actually be using the count. We will be using the distinct count. So that if on 26th of June 2026, we actually made 20 sales, then we won't actually count 26th of June 2026 20 times. No, we will count it once because it was on a single day. So we are basically obtaining the units sold per day. And when we are actually counting the number of dates, we will actually use the distinct count so that you can actually avoid using the duplicate dates. So basically we want to have the unique count of dates, yes, in the denominator. Then in the numerator, we will be having the total quantity sold divided by the total distinct count of sale dates, just like that. So get into this point here so that you can actually insert a measure. So fact sales table there, right click, then we actually say we can call this one the sales velocity. But first, before we actually go into obtain the sales velocity, we have to obtain the total units sold. So for the total units sold, we'll basically say summation of the quantity sold column inside the fact sales table. So sum the quantity sold column inside the fact sales table. So fact sales table, then you are basically focusing on the quantity sold. So you click on it like that, then you close the sum function, then you actually hit enter there on the keyboard. Then you'll basically have the measure there inserted. So it's the total units sold. So scroll down there, we basically have the total units sold. So hit on a card, then the card is actually selected, then you have to tick on the total units sold. So the total units sold is basically equivalent to 57.95. Now, I would also want us to obtain the count of the distinct dates. So count of the distinct dates, so that you can actually say 57.95 divided by the count of distinct dates that we actually do have. That's the distinct sale dates. So to obtain the distinct sale dates, we can actually use the distinct function. So we have to introduce a measure inside the fact sales table there, then hit on a new measure, then we say distinct sale dates, just like that. So space equivalent inside a space. So we are going to use the distinct count, just like that. So distinct count, then open. So we are basically counting the sale dates, and these sale dates are basically inside the fact sales table. So fact sales table there, then we are basically counting the unique sale dates, just like that, and you close the distinct count function. So it will be the total units divided by the distinct count, not the total days, distinct count of days. Just like that, I hit enter on the keyboard, and I will also get a new measure there, which is actually the distinct sale dates. So click on a card like that, then bring it at the center there, then it's actually selected. So I can just activate the distinct sale dates there, and we basically do have 393 sale dates which are actually unique. So distinct actually mean unique. So we now have to divide this, which is the total units sold divided by the distinct sales that you actually do have, so that you can obtain the sales velocity. That's the units sold per day. So in this point, we actually have to use the divide function. So get back into the fact sales table there, right click, hit on the new measure, and then we'll actually say the sales velocity. So sales velocity, just like that. So in the sales velocity space equivalent sign a space, we now have to use the divide function, because it will be the total units sold divided by the total count of unique sale dates, or the distinct number of sale dates. So total units sold and distinct sale dates are both measures inside the fact sales table. And if you actually want to have a list of the measures, you just have to use a square bracket there. So opening square bracket, we have to pick total units sold. So total units sold is somewhere here. Total units sold, yes, comma, space, divided by distinct number of sale dates. So this is also a measure that we actually inserted in the fact sales table. So opening square bracket, scroll down there, and it's actually here, distinct number of sale dates, or distinct sale dates, like that, then a comma. Alternate result is actually a 0 always. Then we actually close the divide function like that, then we hit enter on the keyboard. Then we will now have the sales velocity. Allow me to also click on a card like that, then drag this card to the top right there. Then it's actually selected, so I just have to activate the sales velocity. So scroll down there to where we have the sales velocity, click on it, then you can actually check that we have 14.75. So on average, we actually have 14.75 products being sold, which is approximately 15 products being sold, because we do not have a point of a product. So on average, we actually do have 15 products being sold on a day. So the sales velocity is actually very important, because it will help you to identify the fast moving stock, so that you can actually understand the products that you should actually focus on when it comes to the shelves. So we can break down this sales velocity by the product categories or the product names. So we can actually choose the product names. So I'll actually click outside first. So hit on a matrix like that. After hitting on a matrix, I can actually bring it to this point. Then we have to select the product names. So the product names is actually inside the beam products table. So drag the product name into this point here. Now you have all the product names from med 1001 up to the last item. So these ones are the product names, and I would actually want us to obtain the sales velocities for these products. So go down there to where we have the sales velocities, then you actually select it like that. So hit on the focus mode there. So for these products, for med 1001, the sales velocity is actually 5 products in a day. That's the units of products being sold in a day. Then in this point 2, we have 10 units of med 1002 being sold in a day. In this part 2, we have 5 units of med 1003 being sold in a day. In this part, we also have 1 unit of med 1004 being sold in a day. So if you would actually want to obtain the top products being sold in a day, you hit on that down arrow so that you can obtain this arrangement in a descending order. So hit on the down arrow there, and that's all. Now you can check that the top 3 products, we have med 1078, velocity is actually 14 units per day. Med 1098, velocity is actually 14 units per day. Med 1287, velocity is actually 14 units per day. So these ones are actually the top 3 products when it comes to sales being made in a day. So this is how the sales velocity actually helps you. So now you can actually understand that you should be having a lot of these products in your shelves, and you should be having less of these products down here. So the products down there, instead of us actually scrolling down there, we can just hit on this down arrow too, so that you can obtain in an ascending order. So for these products here, which actually make a sale of 1 unit a day, then it actually means that we have to reduce these products in our shelves, because we are not actually making the sales there. So we are actually making the sales when it comes to med. Let me actually click again. When it comes to med 1078, 1098, 1287. So this is what we should actually focus on in our shelves. So the sales velocity will actually help you when it comes to the shelf management. So that's all. In this point, I want us to break down the total revenue by payment methods. So if you actually go into the table view there, you'll actually realize that inside the fact sales table, we have the payment method column. And you can actually check that we have the different kinds of payments. We have the cards, we have the cash, we have the insurance, and I think there's also another one. I can hit on the filter button there so that I can check on all of them. So we have the card, we have the cash, we have the insurance, and we also do have the mobile. Yes, here is the mobile, and here is the mobile too, and this one here is actually the mobile. Now I would want us to break down the total revenue by the payment methods so that we can actually see the revenue which was actually collected through cash, the revenue which was actually collected through card, the revenue which was actually collected through mobile, and finally the revenue which we collected through insurance. So what you are going to do there is to introduce a measure. So get yourself into the fact sales table, because this is basically where we have the payment method. So right click on it so that you can have a measure and say revenue by card. So revenue by card, just like that, space equivalent sign a space. So revenue by card. So you're starting with the card so that you can go to the cash, insurance, and mobile finally. So we actually use the calculate feature. So calculate, then you open, then already we actually add the total revenue. So opening square bracket so that you can have all the measures. So scroll down there to where we have the total revenue. You click on it like that. So we are obtaining the total revenue where the payment method is equivalent to card, and the payment method, remember, is actually inside the fact sales table. So comma fact sales table so that you can obtain the payment method. So scroll down there to where we basically have the payment method. It's actually here. So where the payment method, which is actually a column inside the fact sales table, is equivalent to card. So space equivalent sign, space opening double quotation, card, just like that, closing double quotations. Then you now have to close the calculate function. So the moment you actually hit enter on the keyboard, we'll basically have the revenue by card inside the fact sales table there. It's actually here, revenue by card. So you can actually check revenue by card. This one was actually the revenue by corporate. That was actually the customer types. So hit on the card there, then just have to select revenue by card. Now you can actually check that the total revenue which was actually collected by card was equivalent to 109.09K. So let's also go into the total revenue collected by cash. So the same thing still. So we have to go into the fact sales table there, right click on it, hit on a new measure, then we say revenue by cash. So backspace that, revenue by cash, just like that, space equivalent sign a space. So we are using the calculate function like that. Then you actually opening square bracket so that you can actually have all the measures. Scroll down there to where we basically have the total revenue. Click on it like that, comma space. So we are obtaining the total revenue where the payment method is equivalent to cash. Payment method is actually inside the fact sales table. So fact sales table there, then you select the payment method, then you actually scroll down there to where we have the payment method. It's actually here. You click on it like that, space equivalent sign a space, opening double quotation, cash, just like that, closing double quotations, close the calculate function, hit enter on the keyboard. That's all. Now hit on a card again there. Then we now have to select the card, then get yourself into the measures, the measure that you actually introduced now. So this is basically the revenue by card, and this is revenue by cash. So this is it. So just take it there. And the total revenue by cash is actually equivalent to 97.58K. So let's also check on the total revenue by insurance. So get up there to where we basically have the table name. So right click on it like that, then hit on the new measure, then backspace so that you can have revenue by insurance like that, space equivalent sign a space. So we are going to introduce the calculate function like that, opening square bracket so that you can actually select the total revenue down here where the payment method is actually insurance. And remember, the payment method is actually inside the fact sales table. So fact sales table like that, scroll down there to where we have the payment method. This must be equivalent to insurance. So space equivalent sign a space, opening double quotation, insurance like that, closing double quotations, then you have to close the calculate function, hit enter on the keyboard. That's all. So hit on a card there, then have this card on this part, then you just have to click on the card, make sure the card is actually selected like that, come to this point here to where we have revenue by insurance. It's actually here, revenue by insurance. Select it like that. So the total revenue that was actually collected by insurance payment method is actually equivalent to 129k. That's 129.00k. Finally, we have the revenue by mobile. So the payment method that we have as our number 4 is mobile. So get up there to where we have the fact sales table. So scroll up there, fact sales table, right click, introduce a new measure there. Then we have revenue by mobile. So delete that, revenue by mobile, just like that, space equivalent sign a space. So you have to use the calculate function like that, then open the calculate function, opening square bracket. Then we now have to select the measure, which is again the total revenue measure. So remember, you have to hit on the square bracket so that you can actually check on all the measures that you actually created. Total revenue is actually a measure that you created. It was not actually a column that existed. It's a measure that we created. So comma there, a space. So we are obtaining the total revenue where the payment method is equivalent to mobile, and that payment method mobile is actually inside the fact sales table. So fact sales table like that, scroll down there to where we have the payment method. So it's actually here, you click on it like that, space equivalent sign, a space, opening double quotation, mobile. Just like that, closing double quotation, close the calculate function, hit enter on the keyboard. That's done. Now hit on a card there, then take the card to the top right there. So make sure the card is actually selected, scroll down so that you can actually select the revenue by mobile, which is actually this one here. So revenue by mobile, you just have to select on it like that. And the total revenue by mobile is actually equivalent to 108.69k. So basically you can check that the highest revenue actually came from insurance, because we actually add 129k. So remember, you can also use a matrix so that you can obtain this one in a second actually. So just like that, now you have to drag the total revenue. So total revenue into the card like that. Then you just have to drag again the payment method. So the payment method again into the same card, just like that, and it's actually done. So for the card, we have 109,086.06, which is basically what we have here. For the cash, we have 97,579.86, which is basically what we have there. For the insurance payment method, we have 129,002.76. And finally, for the mobile payment method, we have 108,690.03. And that's all. So we can also check on the transaction count by methods. So yes, we have the card, we have the cash, insurance, and the mobile, and we also have the breakdown of their revenues. But we can also try to see the number of times that payments were actually made by using the card, the number of times that payments were made by using cash, the number of times payments were actually made by using the insurance method, and finally, the number of times that payments were actually made by using the mobile payment method. So it's actually very simple to obtain that. We have to count the number of rows inside that column where the payment method is actually equivalent to card, is actually equivalent to cash, is actually equivalent to insurance, and finally is equivalent to cash. So in that case, we can actually use a matrix. So we can just click on a matrix like that, then have the matrix up there. Then we basically have to drag the payment method into the rows like that. Now you can actually check that we have the card, the cash, the insurance, and the mobile. Now I would actually want to obtain the count of these payment methods. So what do we actually do? You have to drag the same payment method into the values. Just like that. Then you have to hit on this down arrow there. Then you hit on count. So after clicking on the count, now allow me to expand this like that. Now you can check that for the card, we actually had 198 transactions by card. We had 188 transactions by cash, 206 transactions by insurance, 204 transactions by mobile, and the total transactions was actually equivalent to 796. So that's it. Now remember, you can also use the measures to obtain these counts. So I can actually do for you one, which is actually by card. So let's actually go up there to where we basically have the table, fact sales table there. Right click on it like that. Hit on the new measure. Then we basically say the count transaction count by card. Just like that. space equivalent sign a space. So transaction count by card. So that actually means that we are going into the column for the payment method, then we count the number of rows which is actually equivalent to card. So that actually means that we have to use the calculate function just like that. So we have to use the calculate function and the count rows function. So bring in the count rows function still. So counting the rows inside the fact sales table like that. So we are counting the number of rows inside the fact sales table where the column for the payment method must be equivalent to card, and that column for the payment method is actually inside the fact sales table. So fact sales table like that, scroll down there to where we basically do have the payment method. You click on it like that, space equivalent sign a space, it must be equivalent to a card. Opening double quotation, card. Closing double quotation like that, you close the calculate function, you hit enter on the keyboard. So that one will actually be the transaction by card. So we are actually using this calculate so that it can actually enable us to filter. So we are counting the number of rows in the fact sales table where the column equivalent to payment method is equivalent to card. So this filtering feature here is actually enabled by the use of calculate function there. So that's said and done. I can actually click on a card there. Just like that, scroll down there to where we basically have the transaction count by card. Then I just have to select it like that. So we should actually obtain 198. So select just like that. We have a total of 198. So in this point, we can actually conclude that the digital payments are actually leading, because you can actually check that the count in this part is actually equivalent to 206 for insurance. And when it comes to mobile, the count is also 204. And when it comes to cash, it's actually the least 188. And we can actually say that this is commendable. Why? Because the digital payments will always reduce the handling cost. And that's the benefit of the digital payments over the cash. In this point, I want us to obtain a dashboard. So we'll actually be using the cards. We will also have the line chart, the pie chart, the column chart, the bar chart, and finally the donut chart. So for the cards, we will actually have 5 items, which is actually the total units sold, the total revenue, the low stock alert, the inventory value, and expiring in 30 days. So we can actually click on a card so that you can actually duplicate it 5 times. So this is actually the first one. Allow me to actually resize it first, something like that. Then I'll click on it, then hit Ctrl C to actually copy, then Ctrl V to paste, Ctrl V again. That's number 3, number 4, and number 5. So just like that, you have to distribute this, and this is it. Drag this like that. You can still squeeze this like that, squeeze this like that again, and then we can now have 1 in this part here. So that actually means we have to squeeze this further. It's not that bad actually. So I can just reduce the size here. Yep. Reduce the size here to a bit. Reduce the size here to just a bit. Then on this part, reduce the size a bit again. To the first card, we'll actually drag the total units sold. So scroll down there. We basically have the total units sold. Remember, it was actually a measure. So click on the first card, then come to this point here and select the total units sold. So the total units sold is basically equivalent to 57.95. Come to the second card. This is where I want us to have the total revenue. So the total revenue is also the measure that we actually created inside the facts sales table. Then I have to select the total revenue. Remember, I've actually clicked on the card there. It's actually active. So hit on the total revenue, and it's actually equivalent to 444.36k. Come to this point here for the low stock alert. Click on a card there. Then go up there to where we basically have the low stock alert. Then you have to select on it like that. So the count of products which are actually on a low stock are actually equivalent to 21. So these 21 items actually need to be restocked. Then let's actually go to the fourth one. We'll actually be having the inventory value. So you click on it like that, then we have the inventory value. Remember, for the inventory value, we actually add the inventory value. We also add the stock value. Then we also add the total inventory value. If I click on this like that, deselect that, then hit on the inventory value, you'll actually check that you'll still be having the same value, 16.19M. So a lot of capital has actually been invested in the stock. So let's now obtain the stock quantity expiring in less than or equivalent to 30 days. So you click on the card like that, then expiring in 30 days, you have to select on it. So 42. So this is basically the total quantity or the total stock quantity, which is actually expiring in less than or equivalent to 30 days. And this is actually the inventory value. This is the total count of products having the stock to be less than 100. And this is the total revenue. And this is basically the total units sold. So allow me to actually resize this like that so that you can have a space down here. Click on this again like that. Resize it like that up there. That's actually done. Come to this point again for the lost stock alert. Take it up there. It's actually done. Come to this point here for the inventory value. Take it up there. It's actually done. Come to this point here for the card of expiring in 30 days. Take it up there, and that's actually okay. So we basically have our four cards there. Now I want us to insert a line chart so that you can also have the monthly sales trends. So for the line chart, it's actually here. I'll actually click on it like that, then expand it like that, drag it up there. So expand it like that, take it to the right, and I think that's actually okay. So in this point, we'll be having the monthly sales trends. So what you have to do is to drag the sale date into the x-axis like that. So drag the total revenue into the y-axis. And this is basically what you get. But in my case, I would actually want us to have the year and the quarter when it comes to the x-axis. So I'll remove the month. I'll also remove the day. So we now have the quarters, which is actually running from January 2025 to April 2025. All the way to July of 2025, October 2025, January 2026, then April 2026. So these ones are basically the quarters. So 4 quarters of 2025 and 2 quarters of 2026. So our data was actually running up to April of 2026. That's why we actually have 2 quarters when it comes to 2026. And our data was actually starting from 1st of January 2025. That's why we basically have complete quarters when it comes to 2025. So that's all when it comes to the monthly sales trends. Now you can actually check that when it comes to July of 2025, which is basically quarter 3, we actually had the highest revenue equivalent to 87,576.28. It was actually the highest. Then the list is actually coming from April, which is actually quarter 2 of 2026, and the total revenue is actually equivalent to 57,472.57. So you can actually track the trends here. I would also want us to have the pie chart, which is actually for the total inventory value by category. So that will be a pie chart. I'll actually click on a pie chart there, then drag it to the center here, then expand like that, then expand upwards. That's all. Then I'll squeeze it a bit like that, and that's okay. So total inventory value by category. So scroll up there to where we have the total inventory value or the stock value or the inventory value. So I can actually click on it like that. So you can click on this one. You can also click on the stock value, or you can as well click on the inventory value. So by category. So you also have to select the category. So click on the category there. Now you can actually check that we have all these 7 categories. Pain relief category, diabetes, cardio, vitamins, respiratory, and antibiotics. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So they are basically 6. Yes, they are basically 6. So you can actually check that the largest share actually goes to this one here, which is basically for the pain relief. It actually takes 20.97%, which is equivalent to a total inventory value of that 394,504.80. So most of the items in stock actually belong to the pain relief category, followed by this one here, which is basically for the diabetes. So you can check that for the diabetes, we also have 20.13%. Then finally followed by this one here, which is for the cardio. So the top 3 will actually be the pain relief, then followed by diabetes, then finally we have the cardio. So majority of our stock actually falls in those 3 categories. Let's now check on the next one, which is actually the sales by customer type. So this one will actually be a column chart. I will hit on a column chart there. Remember, we do not actually have a column chart in these visualizations. So you always have to click on the stacked column chart. So a stacked column chart is actually formed by adding another item on top of a column chart. So a stacked column chart is always a column chart at first. Then you actually modify it. So after modification, it becomes a stacked column chart. But before modification, it is always a column chart. As you can actually check in this point here. So it's actually a column chart, just like that. Then drag it down there. It's actually done. So in this point, it will be sales by customer type. So drag the customer type. So make sure you have actually clicked on the column chart there. Look for the customer type. So scroll down there to where we basically have the customer type. It's actually here. You select it like that, or you can just drop it into the x-axis. Then go down there to where we basically do have the revenue. So for the revenue, we have the total revenue. So you can actually drag it into the y-axis or just select it like that. So basically, we have the total revenue distributed by customer types. You can actually check that when it comes to the insured customer types, we have the highest revenue equivalent to 123,873.54, and the lowest one is actually for the walk-in customer types who are actually having a total revenue of 102,683.30. The next one is basically a bar chart. That one will actually be the revenue by payment methods. So click on a bar chart like that. Then it's actually down here. So that one will be the revenue by payment methods. So you have to drag in the payment methods. Make sure you have actually selected on the bar chart there so that you can actually go into selecting the payment method. Then scroll down there to where we basically do have the total revenue. So click on it again. So the total revenue by payment methods, you can actually check that. The leading one is actually insurance with total revenue of 129,002.76. So we can actually conclude in this point here that majority of the revenue in this pharmacy store is actually received through insurance payment method, and cash is the least preferred payment method by the customers. Now I want us to also check on the average lead time by city. So that one will actually be a donut chart. So I'll actually hit on a donut chart there, then drag it to this point like that. Then average lead time by city. So I'll have to scroll to this point here for the dim suppliers. That's the suppliers table there. Then I'll actually select the city, which is actually okay there. So I have Chicago, Boston, Los Angeles, Miami. Then we also do have the New York there. Then I'll actually drag the lead time in days into the values there, and we'll basically have this. So in my case, I never wanted the count of lead time, but instead I wanted to have the average. So hit on the average there. So the average of lead time in days by cities. So that's it. Now, the one item that I would actually want us to insert in this point is a slicer. So to actually bring in the slicer, I'll actually try to bring this one down here like that. I think we can actually have the average of lead time in days by category. That one will actually make more sense. So allow me to actually remove this city. Scroll up there. We basically have the category there. So bring in the category into the legend just like that. And this is basically what we have. So which is actually very good to my case. Now I would actually want us to have a slicer. So I'll actually click on the button slicer inside the visualizations. Click on it like that. Then bring it to this point here like that. Then drag it to the right. And that's all. Then drag it down there like that. It's fine. Drag it up there. It's also fine. So in this point, the slicer will basically be having the category. So click inside the slicer, then select, and this is basically what we have. So we can now do the filtering based on this slicer here, which is basically the category slicer. So if I click on the antibiotics, now you can actually check that everything in the dashboard is actually responding. Click on the cardio like that. It's actually responding from all the cards there to all these visualizations. Click on the diabetes there. Click on the pain relief. Click on the respiratory. Click on the vitamins. They are all responding. So to clear the filtering, you just have to hit on this point here inside the slicer, which is actually clear selections. So you clear the selections there. That's all. Now, I would also want us to insert a text box so that we can have the title. So inside the insert tab there, we basically have what you call the text box inside the elements. Then drag this one up there again. Drag this up like that, which is actually fine in my case. Like that again. Then you can actually leave some small space there, just like that. Now we can have the title to be pharmacy store project, just like that. Then we have to select everything there. So select all there, then hit on bold, then increase the font size to 18 there, then bring it at the center like that. Before P, have the cursor there, hit enter on the keyboard so that it can actually be aligned at the center. So I have this one up there a bit. So that's basically done in my case. So we have the pharmacy store project, and this is basically the dashboard. So I can squeeze this one like that. So I can now collapse this like that, and collapse the visualizations again. So this is basically our final project, and that's actually the title. The total units sold is 5795. The total revenue is 444.36k. The low stock count is 21. Inventory value 16.19 M. The total sum of stock quantity expiring in 30 days time is actually 42. So we have basically analyzed this in 10 different ways, and this is the final dashboard. So you might as well want to have the page background there. So what you are going to do there is to come to this point here, then hit on the drop down there. Then in this point here, we have to hit on the customize current theme, then hit on the page, then page background. Then on this part, you have to pick a color. In this point, this is the color that I've actually picked. Then the transparency, have it at 50%. So 50% is somewhere there. Then I just have to hit on apply there, and that's all. So this is basically what we have, but you can actually check that it's a bit dull. So what you are going to do is to actually change it. So I'll click on it like that, get into the view tab still, then hit on the drop down there, scroll down to this point, customize current theme. Then in this point, I'll actually pick page, then page background, then select the color. So I'll actually come to this point here and select that color, which is actually okay in my case. Then the transparency is actually 50%. Hit on apply there, and this is a bit good in my case. So what you have to do is to resize these cards like that. So I have it resized like that. This one again, that's actually okay. So I'll actually click on this one, take it to the right like that. Click on this one, take it to the right again like that. Then this one is basically okay. So let's also click on it like that so that we can actually take it upwards like that. That's good. Click on this one again, take it upwards. That's fine. Click on this one again, take it upwards like that. That's cool. Click on this one again, take it upwards. Click on the last one there. Then we have to take it upwards like that. So this one is actually good in my case. So for this one here, we have to resize it, drag it downwards like that. Yes. For this case, I think it's actually good. Now for this one, let's also take it upwards so that we can reduce the space there. That's good. For this one again, bring it downwards like that. That's good. For this one, we also have to bring it downwards a bit like that. That's good. And we now have to take it downwards fully, just like that, and it's good. Now we can also check on these sizes here. We can check that the size is actually uniform. In this point, the size is not actually uniform. So what you are going to do is to increase the size here like that. That's okay. This point, click on it again like that, then increase the size to the right, just like that. So in this point too, for the slicer button there, we can actually drag it upwards like that, and that's all. So clearly you can check that we have the 5 cards there. We have the line chart, the pie chart, the slicer buttons there. We have the donut chart, the column chart, and the bar chart, and the title up there. So do not actually worry at all about the change when it comes to this card here, which is expiring in 30 days time. So remember, it was actually 42.42, but now it's actually 49.83. It was 42.42 because when I was creating the first part of this dashboard, we were actually on 26th of June 2026, but now we are on 27th of June 2026. So basically, the items will actually increase. So don't worry about this. It's always refreshing itself, but all these other items are actually placed properly. So that's all about this dashboard.